Dan was succeeded in a most extraordinary way by, I think, Budo's least known headmaster, and I hope when you read my account of his headship, you will agree with me that he did a remarkable service, in his own words, in keeping the Budo train on the rails. This was Ishmael Uyirwoth, and Uyirwoth was required to be headmaster of Budo. He didn't want the job either. But after 4.5 years, Dan kind of felt free to go back to his evangelical work, and he was a pretty sick man anyway. The job had taken a tremendous toll of him. So Uyirwoth one day, the governors said they wanted Erisa Kirondi. Well, Erisa Kirondi by then had had the gumption to move into administration, and he'd actually moved to Nairobi. He wasn't available. They then said, well, if they couldn't have Kirondi, they wanted Bauba. And the ministry said, you can't have Bauba because we've just made him headmaster of Kampala High School, as it's now called, the Aga Khan School. So the Budo governors very unwisely, and to any governors here, I commend that this action be never repeated. They did nothing for about 6 weeks. And the ministry then said, right, if the Budo governors are not going to do anything, we'll do something. And they summoned into the office of the Chief Education Officer the Chief Inspector for Geography, Ishmael Uyirwoth. And they said to him, Budo has no headmaster, we want you to be headmaster of Budo. And he's a very amusing chap, Uyirwoth, and he said, I thought very quickly, because he'd no idea why he'd been asked to come to the office. And he said, sir, there are 3 reasons why I should not go to Budo. First, I am not an old Budonian. Second, I am not a Muganda, he was from West Nile. And third, I am very happy in my job in the inspectorate. So they told him to go off to the conference he was just about to go to in Nairobi, and they would think about it. And a fortnight later he came back, and there was a message on his desk saying, see Chief Education Officer immediately. And as he walked up the stairs to the Chief Education Officer's office, Daniel Kianda was walking down the stairs, and he said, congratulations. And Uyirwoth said, on what? And Dan said, you're the next headmaster of Budo. And he was told it was a Tuesday, you are headmaster of Budo, and you start on Thursday. Now, this was really preposterous behaviour. But even worse, or even better in some ways, occurred on the following Sunday, because Uyirwoth realised that there was a crisis. There was no chapel preacher. The chapel committee had thought it had booked a bishop, and he was double booked. He was preaching in Nairobi Cathedral. So there was a little crisis meeting outside the chapel, and Uyirwoth told me, he said, I thought, well, I might as well take the plunge. It's a good chance. And he said to them, look, if you would like your headmaster to give a short address, I would be quite willing to do so. And the group looked at him in almost thunderstruck amazement, and they said, but sir, we assumed you were a Muslim. Ishmael Uyirwoth. But above all, of course, he'd been appointed under Amin's regime, and they assumed that Amin had personally, which he hadn't, intervened to appoint a Muslim. So Uyirwoth got off to an extraordinarily difficult start, but he was a man of great courage, and he, as your fine historian Abdul Basozi, to whom I owe a great debt, because I've used his wonderful book, The Social Origins of Violence in Uganda, as providing most of the background to what was happening to the country while Budo was trying to keep alive from 1971 to 1986. But the story of Uyirwoth's skillful defence is one very well worth reading. He got very little credit for it. One of Timothy Cobb's other jokes was that Uganda was an interesting country because the Ugandans were very generous and warm in welcoming you, and they were equally warm and generous in saying goodbye to you. It was the period in between that was actively difficult. Well, poor old Uyirwoth, as I said, got no welcome at all. 10 of the 16 staff had never even heard of him, and the other 6 didn't know he was coming. But when he left, it was because there had been several death threats against him, which he ignored, but which the ministry was not prepared to risk. And he was not dismissed, but asked to return by a message taken up by a motorcyclist up the hill late in 1979, when he was just getting ready for what he hoped would be a good term after the expulsion of Amin and the success of the Tanzanian army. And the letter said, hand over to John and Paggy in the next 24 hours. Well, to his great credit, Uyirwoth said he couldn't do that. It was just not long enough. He needed 10 days. And during those 10 days, he wrote a masterly summing up report of his time at Budo. And he coined a phrase which I think is a very good one for our next 100 years. And I've taken the liberty of using it as the heading to the chapter I've just finished writing about George Semigule's 5 years. He said this. He said, I think there is no future for Budo until Budo staff can learn to behave themselves, because he'd had to put up with a great deal of indiscipline and drunkenness by staff. And I think there is also no future for Budo unless it can get out of its regressive and negative conservatism and have a considered policy of progressive conservatism. And that means, yes, conserving the best of your past, but also being willing to change. Uyirwoth was a fine head. He was succeeded by Eliezer Baruba,